Cheating wife gets husband jailed. Then he sends a gift that makes her scream. The sound of the gavel striking the judge's bench was like the final nail in Kurt D'Angelo's coffin. $6,500 a month. Every month. Until your daughter turns 18. And if she goes to college, you'll cover those expenses too. Kurt's fingers clenched into fists beneath the polished wooden table. The courtroom smelled of old books and cheap cologne, and the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, like a warning siren that only he could hear. His ex-wife, Lily, sat just a few feet away, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table as she listened to the judge with an air of self-satisfaction. She was dressed to impress, a tailored gray blazer, a silky blouse that probably cost more than his entire monthly grocery bill, and a smug smile that made his blood boil. It wasn't enough that she had cheated on him. It wasn't enough that she had been caught in the arms of one of her colleagues, whispering sweet nothings in the same voice she once used to tell him she loved him. No, she had to take everything. Their daughter, their home, and now, over half his monthly income. The judge continued reading the verdict, but Kurt had stopped listening. Regina, their 15-year-old daughter, sat beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrest of her chair. She had made it clear that she wanted to live with her father, that she wanted nothing to do with her mother's new glamorous lifestyle or the carousel of men who came and went through her law firm. But the judge, oh, the honorable judge, didn't care. Mr. D'Angelo, the judge droned, peering down at him with a patronizing expression. Do you understand the terms of this agreement? Kurt exhaled slowly, forcing himself to relax. He had learned, growing up in a rough Chicago neighborhood, that letting anger get the best of you never ended well. But right now, he wanted to flip this entire courtroom upside down. Instead, he met the judge's gaze and nodded. Crystal clear, Your Honor. He turned his head slightly and caught Lily's lawyer smirking, a young, cocky associate from her firm, with slick back hair and the confidence of someone who had never actually been punched in the face before. The kind of guy who thought he was untouchable. Lily's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her, and she let out a quiet chuckle, shaking her head as if Kurt wasn't even worth discussing. They thought they had won. They thought they had him on his knees. Kurt D'Angelo had taken hits before, plenty of them, from life, from the streets, from his past. But there was one thing nobody seemed to understand about him. He never stayed down. The plan begins. By the time court adjourned, Kurt had already started formulating his plan. He stood, rolling his shoulders back, stretching out the tension that had coiled in his muscles. Lily made a show of ignoring him as she gathered her things, whispering to her lawyer like they were discussing weekend brunch plans. Kurt turned to Regina, placing a hand on her shoulder. You okay, kiddo? She looked up at him, her deep brown eyes filled with frustration. It's not fair, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom's a liar, and they just let her win. He nodded, his jaw tightening. Yeah, I know. Lily turned then, her expression the perfect blend of fake sympathy and triumph. Regina, sweetheart, she said, reaching out for their daughter. We should get going. Regina recoiled slightly, stepping closer to Kurt. Lily's eyes darkened for a split second before she forced a patient smile. We'll talk more at home. Kurt exhaled, his mind racing. He had 30 days before the first spousal support payment was due. 30 days to make sure Lily would regret every single dollar she took from him. She wanted his money? Fine, she would get it. But not the way she expected. Lily's scream echoed through the marble-floored foyer, bouncing off the walls of the house she had fought so hard to keep. Her manicured fingers clutched the letter, knuckles white as she reread each sentence. Her mind raced, disbelief and panic clawing at her throat. This had to be a joke, a bluff. But the cold, sinking feeling in her gut told her otherwise. Her breath hitched as she grabbed her phone, fingers trembling while she dialed her lawyer, Stephen. The phone barely rang once before he picked up. Lily? What is it? Kurt. She spat his name like poison. He's screwing with me from jail. He sent me a letter. He's threatening to stop paying the mortgage, cancel my insurance, and she hesitated, eyes darting to the unopened mail sitting on the entryway table. A thick, official-looking envelope from the bank sat on top. Dread curdled in her stomach. And what? Stephen pressed. Lily swallowed hard, snatching up the envelope and ripping it open. Her eyes darted over the words, her vision blurring as she reached the part that made her stomach drop. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. The letter slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like the last leaf of autumn before the cold bite of winter. Steve in my house. Her voice cracked. He actually did it. He stopped paying. Silence on the other end. Then a sigh. Lily, I told you to play this smarter, Stephen said, his voice lined with frustration. You push him too far. He's always been the kind of guy to strike back hard. You should have known better. Are you blaming me for this? She snapped. No, but you underestimated him. And now, we have to clean up the mess. You can't afford to lose that house, not after the image you've built at the firm. If the partners find out you're broke, it'll destroy your credibility. Lily pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling a headache coming on. So what do we do? First, we fight the foreclosure. I'll talk to the bank, see if we can delay things. But you need a backup plan. Lily exhaled sharply. Like what? Stephen hesitated. You might need to sell the house before they take it from you. It'll look better than having it repossessed. Sell it. Her voice rose in outrage. I fought for this damn house in the divorce. I am not letting him win. You should be more worried about the IRS, Stephen muttered. Lily's blood ran cold. What do you mean? You said he sent something to your boss, right? If he has proof of anything shady with the firm's finances, or your own, it could get bad. If the IRS sniffs around, they won't just be looking at him. Lily felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. She staggered to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands, and downed it in one go. No, this is fixable. I just need to get him to stop. He's in jail. He can't do much from there. Lily, Stephen said, voice low, you don't understand. Kurt has connections. She frowned. What kind of connections? The kind that don't need a law degree to ruin you. The kind that don't play by courtroom rules. For the first time since the divorce, real fear gripped her. She had always seen Kurt as a rough-around-the-edges businessman. Smart, sure, a survivor. But she had assumed that once she got the court on her side, once she had the law backing her, he would be powerless. She was wrong. And now, she had no idea how far he was willing to go. Meanwhile, in Cook County Jail, Kurt sat on the edge of his cot, stretching out his arms as he listened to the faint hum of voices beyond his cell. The infirmary visit had done him good. His bruises were healing, and his mind had never been sharper. He wasn't just sitting in jail. He was strategizing. A low chuckle drew his attention. Across the cell, Ringer leaned against the bars, smirking, word spreading, Texas. People are talking about you. Kurt smirked. Good or bad? Depends on who you ask. The guards hate you. The inmates respect you. Me? I'm just enjoying the show. Kurt nodded, cracking his knuckles. Lily thinks she's won, but she hasn't even begun to lose yet. Ringer tilted his head. What's next? Kurt leaned forward, his voice a low, controlled growl. I sent her a warning shot. Now I let her squirm. She'll try to fight the foreclosure. She'll panic when the money dries up. She'll scramble when she realizes her cushy job isn't so secure anymore. And when she's at her lowest, when she thinks she's barely surviving. He smiled. I'll send her the final gift. Ringer whistled. Damn, remind me never to cross you. Kurt just grinned, his blue eyes glinting with something dangerous. Lily had thought she could betray him, humiliate him, and strip him of everything he loved. She had forgotten one simple rule. Never mess with a man who has nothing left to lose. Kurt D'Angelo sat in the courtroom, his fingers laced together, expression unreadable. He had been through enough battles in life to know that court wasn't about truth or justice. It was about power. And today, The system was determined to crush him under its heel. Across the aisle, Lily sat with her lawyer, a smug smirk on her perfectly painted lips. She had already won the divorce, taken his daughter, and drained his bank account. Now, she was here to make sure he suffered just a little more. The judge, a gray-haired man with weary eyes and an air of unchallenged authority, cleared his throat. Mr. D'Angelo, it has come to my attention that your recent spousal support payment was made entirely in coins. Is that correct? Kurt leaned back, his voice calm. That's correct, Your Honor. I followed the court's ruling. I paid exactly what was ordered. Lily's lawyer, a tall man with a permanent look of condescension, stood. Your Honor, the way he paid was nothing short of harassment. My client had to spend hours cleaning up that mess, and the weight of the coins caused damage to her floors. Kurt's lawyer, a sharp-witted man named O'Malley, adjusted his tie and stood. Your Honor, with all due respect, U.S. currency is legal tender for all debts. My client's method of payment may have been inconvenient, but it was not illegal. The judge frowned. Mr. D'Angelo, why pay this way? Kurt smirked. It's money, isn't it? A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The judge wasn't amused. Lily's lawyer pounced. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client has yet to receive any child support payments. Mr. D'Angelo has been willfully neglecting his obligations. Kurt's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. He knew what was coming next. O'Malley gave a slow, deliberate nod. Actually, Your Honor, the child support has been deposited directly into Miss Regina D'Angelo's personal account, which she has full access to. If you'd like confirmation, she's present in the courtroom. The judge turned his gaze toward Regina. Sitting in the front row, she met his eyes without flinching. Is this true? He asked. Regina nodded. Yes, sir. My dad made sure I got everything I needed. Lily's lawyer faltered, his confidence slipping. That wasn't the response he had been expecting. Kurt finally turned to Lily, meeting her cold stare. You thought I'd be stupid enough to let you control the money? Think again. For the first time, Lily's smirk disappeared. O'Malley pressed forward. We also have proof of continued mortgage and insurance payments, as required by the divorce ruling. Mr. D'Angelo has not failed in his responsibilities. The judge hesitated. Things weren't going as smoothly as he had planned. Lily's lawyer quickly regrouped. Regardless, Your Honor, paying in small coins is clearly an act of defiance and disrespect to this court. My client simply requests that future payments be made via check. Kurt was about to respond, but O'Malley was faster. Your Honor, I have a question. The judge, now visibly irritated, sighed. Go on. O'Malley's lips curled into a slow smile. Are the Chicago police part of the legal system? The judge blinked. Yes, of course. O'Malley stepped closer. Then if Mr. D'Angelo were to have his car impounded by the Chicago Police Department, could he retrieve it with a personal check? The courtroom fell silent. The judge shifted uncomfortably. No, he would need to pay in cash or with a credit card. O'Malley's smile widened. So let me get this straight. If the police, who are part of the legal system, won't accept a check, why should my client be required to pay spousal support with one? A murmur spread through the spectators. The judge's face darkened. He had been backed into a corner, and he knew it. Because this is my courtroom, the judge snapped, and I make the rules. Kurt exhaled slowly. There it was, the truth. This wasn't about justice. This was about power. The judge was protecting Lily, plain and simple. Kurt rose to his feet, his patience gone. You're not upholding the law. You're just bending over for my wife's law firm. What? Are you sleeping with her too? The courtroom gasped. Lily's face turned white. The judge's eyes flared with fury. Mr. D'Angelo, you are in contempt of court. I sentence you to 6 months in Cook County Jail unless you apologize and agree to my ruling. Kurt locked eyes with him. He could back down now, swallow his pride, and walk out with his freedom. Or he could make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of judge they were dealing with. He gave the judge a slow, defiant smile. You can take your court and shove it. The judge's face turned red. "Bailiff, take him away." As the guards grabbed his arms, he turned to Lily. She was staring at him, victorious. She thought she had won. Kurt grinned, not even close. As they led him out of the courtroom, he whispered over his shoulder, "Good luck paying your bills, sweetheart." Lily frowned, and for the first time that day, she felt a sliver of unease. Lily Carmichael D'Angelo stood in the center of her immaculate living room, staring down at the elegantly wrapped box that had just arrived at her doorstep. The gold ribbon shimmered under the warm glow of the chandelier, but something about it felt ominous. Her perfectly manicured fingers hesitated over the lid. Kurt, it had to be him. Even from jail, he was trying to get under her skin. But she had won. He was rotting in a cell while she enjoyed the spoils of their divorce. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. With a sharp tug, she loosened the bow and lifted the lid. Inside, resting atop black silk lining, was a single white envelope. The sight of it sent a chill skittering down her spine. Slowly, she unfolded the letter. "Dear Lily, you took my money, my daughter, and my freedom. But you forgot one thing I never lose. Look around, sweetheart. See that mortgage? I stopped paying it. You wanted luxury? Enjoy the foreclosure notice arriving next week. Remember that fancy health insurance? Canceled. Hope you saved up for those doctor visits. And as for your law firm, well, let's just say your boss might not appreciate the evidence I sent him about your office activities. But don't worry, you won't be completely alone. Your old friend, the IRS, will be in touch soon. Turns out, hiding assets in divorce proceedings is a federal offense. Have fun explaining that. See you around, love." Kurt. Lily's fingers trembled as she clutched the letter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "No, no, no," she whispered, shaking her head. She darted to the kitchen, grabbing her phone with a force that nearly knocked over her overpriced imported vase. She scrolled to her bank's app, her nails tapping frantically against the screen. Account balance, $642.13. Her stomach lurched. Where was the money? The alimony, the child support, the mortgage payments? She refreshed the screen, as if sheer desperation could will the numbers to change. Nothing. A sense of dread curled in her gut. She switched apps, dialing her lawyer. "Lily," he answered, his tone neutral. "Tom, something's wrong. My account, my mortgage, I think, Kurt." "I was about to call you," Tom interrupted, his voice tight. "We have a problem." Lily's throat tightened. "A problem?" "The managing partners received a file this morning," he continued. "It contains, well, explicit evidence of your relationships with several members of the firm, including myself." Lily's blood ran cold. "We're looking at potential ethics violations. I'm being removed from my cases pending an internal review. And you, I don't know how you did it, but you made a lot of enemies here, Lily. They're talking about termination." Her vision blurred. "Termination? But you said—" "It doesn't matter what I said." Tom cut her off. "You should have been smarter." The line went dead. Lily's grip slackened, and the phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound barely registered. This couldn't be happening. Kurt was supposed to be rotting in jail, powerless. How had he done this? She turned back to the letter in the gift box, her eyes darting over the words again, searching for some sign, some loophole. Then she noticed something she hadn't before, a final line, written in ink so faint she had to hold it under the kitchen light to read it. "Check your mail, darling. There's more." Her pulse pounded in her ears as she bolted to the front door, wrenching it open. The afternoon sun was blinding, but she didn't care. She sprinted to the mailbox, yanking it open with such force that the metal door nearly bent backward. Inside, among the usual bills and junk mail, was a thick, official-looking envelope from the Internal Revenue Service. Her knees nearly buckled. With shaking hands, she tore it open. The first line of the letter sent ice through her veins. Notice of audit, potential tax fraud investigation. Lily let out a strangled gasp. Her carefully constructed world, The one she had fought for, schemed for, cheated for, was crumbling. She barely noticed the concerned neighbor peering from across the street. She didn't care. The only thought pounding through her mind was Kurt did this. And she had no idea what else was coming. The night in Cook County Jail was like every other, thick with the stench of sweat, despair, and unspoken threats. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects, flickering just enough to keep the tension in the air alive. Kurt D'Angelo lay on his metal cot, hands behind his head, staring at the cracked ceiling above. He wasn't asleep. He never slept deeply in a place like this. He had been inside for 2 weeks now, biding his time, planning his next move. Lily thought she had one. That smug smirk in the courtroom, the way she taunted him with her victory, thinking the system had crushed him. She had no idea what was coming. But first, he had to survive. The warning. Randall Ringer Turner, his old friend from the streets, had given him the heads up earlier that day. Tex, Ringer had said in a low voice, using Kurt's old nickname. Word is some of the COs are getting paid off to make your life hell. You pissed off the wrong people. Kurt didn't need to ask who. Lily's law firm had deep pockets and plenty of connections. It wasn't just about keeping him locked up. It was about making sure he left here in pieces. They making a move tonight? Kurt asked, voice calm even. Ringer hesitated. I heard 6 of them. Inmates. Plus maybe 2 guards. You know what that means. It meant he wasn't just in for a beating. They were going to send a message, one written in blood. Kurt cracked his knuckles. La Chincon. The setup. Midnight. The cell block was quiet except for the occasional cough or the distant echo of boots against the concrete floor. The guards had done their rounds, and now the real game was about to begin. A sudden buzz, then the metallic groan of the cell door sliding open. That wasn't supposed to happen. Kurt sat up slowly, his muscles coiled like a spring. 6 figures entered the cell. Large, hulking shadows, their faces twisted in anticipation. At the door, 2 guards stood watch, smirking. Bought men. The leader, a shaved-headed brute with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, cracked his neck. Heard you've been talking tough in court. Texas, his voice was gravel and menace. Time to see if you're still tough when you're bleeding out. The others chuckled. One of them, a wiry guy with tattoos creeping up his neck, flipped a shank between his fingers. Kurt stayed seated on his cot, rubbing his jaw as if considering his options. 6 on 1, he asked, his tone almost amused. Didn't think lawyers played fair, but damn. Scarface sneered. You think this is a joke? Kurt tilted his head. No, but I do think you're about to regret this. The fight. The first punch came fast, Scarface lunging forward with a wild swing. But Kurt had spent years fighting in back alleys and bar brawls. He dodged, grabbing Scarface's wrist and twisting it with a sharp crack. The man screamed as bones snapped. Chaos erupted. The wiry guy slashed with his shank, but Kurt kicked him in the gut, sending him sprawling into the metal toilet. Another man charged, but Kurt used his momentum, pivoting and slamming his elbow into the guy's throat. He gagged, stumbling back. A second later, Kurt felt a sharp sting in his side. The blade. He gritted his teeth as warmth spread across his ribs, but pain was just a distraction. He grabbed the shank-wielding man by the wrist, twisting until he heard the satisfying pop of a dislocated joint. The blade clattered to the floor, and Kurt drove his knee into the man's face. Blood sprayed against the wall. Scarface, despite his broken wrist, lunged again, desperate. Kurt ducked and drove his fist into the man's gut, then followed with an uppercut so hard it lifted him off his feet. One left. The last attacker hesitated, seeing the carnage. Then he turned and ran. The guards, no longer smirking, stepped forward, but before they could react, Ringer and 2 of his crew appeared outside the cell. Y'all didn't see nothing, Ringer growled at the guards. For a moment, it was a standoff. Then, one of the guards muttered a curse and turned away. The other followed. Bought men, but cowards all the same. Kurt wiped the blood from his lip, breathing hard. This wasn't just a warning. This was war. The message. The next morning, word spread fast. Everyone knew what had happened. Kurt D'Angelo wasn't just some rich real estate guy with a grudge. He was a man you didn't cross. When the nurse in the infirmary stitched him up, she shook her head. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Kurt just smiled. Lily had sent men to break him, but all she'd done was remind him of who he really was. And now? Now it was her turn to bleed. The fluorescent light above flickered as Kurt D'Angelo blinked awake, his head throbbing like a war drum. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and the sharp pain in his ribs reminded him exactly where he was, the infirmary of Cook County Jail. He gritted his teeth. They'd jumped him. 6 men, handpicked and sent in by the guards, had dragged him into a brutal beatdown. He didn't remember much past the first few punches, just the taste of blood and the dull realization that this wasn't just about prison hierarchy. Someone on the outside had pulled the strings. Lily. The thought alone made his hands clench into fists, though even that small movement sent searing pain through his muscles. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. A soft rustling near the doorway made him turn his head. A nurse stood beside his bed, her hazel eyes filled with something Kurt hadn't seen in weeks: kindness. You're awake, she said softly. I was starting to wonder if you were planning on staying unconscious forever. Kurt tried to smirk, but winced instead. Figured I'd take a little vacation. Jail's been stressful. She gave a small laugh, but it faded quickly. You were out for almost a full day. Broken ribs, fractured wrist, concussion. You're lucky to be alive. He grunted. Lucky isn't the word I'd use. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Listen, I don't know what you did to land yourself in here, but I can tell when someone's been set up. That wasn't just a prison fight. That was a message. Kurt met her gaze. She was smart. Too smart to work in a place like this. Do me a favor, he said, voice low. Can you get a message to someone? She hesitated, glancing toward the door. Depends. He exhaled sharply, shifting in his bed. I need to see Randall Turner. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can do. The next morning, Randall Ringer Turner walked into the infirmary, his sharp eyes scanning Kurt's injuries before whistling low. Damn, Texas. They really did a number on you. Kurt forced himself upright, ignoring the fire in his ribs. Yeah, well, it takes 6 cowards to bring me down. Ringer chuckled, but then got serious. So what's the plan? Kurt's mind had been spinning all night, forming and refining the next move in his game of chess. This wasn't just a random attack, he said. Somebody's trying to keep me down. Lily, Ringer guessed. Kurt nodded. Her, and whoever's backing her. The judge? Maybe. Someone at her firm? Definitely. But here's the thing. His lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. They made a mistake. Ringer leaned in. Yeah. They didn't kill me. Ringer let out a dark chuckle. So what's the next move, Tex? Kurt took a breath, letting the anger settle into something colder, sharper. I need the names of the 6 guys who jumped me. Not their nicknames, their real names. Ringer raised an eyebrow. Why? Kurt's grin was razor sharp. Because when I'm done, they'll wish they never laid a hand on me. Ringer smirked. Damn, I miss this side of you. Kurt's eyes darkened. You ain't seen nothing yet. Meanwhile, across town, Lily sat in her sleek, modern office, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. The scent of victory was intoxicating. Kurt was out of the way, locked up, beaten down, and soon he'd be nothing more than a memory. She had everything. The house, the money, the connections. Or so she thought. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned, hesitated, then answered. Hello. A deep, familiar voice hummed through the receiver. Hope you enjoyed my little gift, sweetheart. The glass of wine slipped from her fingers, shattering onto the marble floor. A dim fluorescent light flickered above as Kurt D'Angelo sat on the stiff, creaking cot of his jail cell, muscles aching from the beating he'd taken. The sterile smell of bleach mixed with the sweat and grime of the inmates around him. His ribs throbbed, his lip was split, and there was dried blood on his temple from where one of the guards had accidentally let an elbow connect. But none of that mattered, because Kurt wasn't broken. No, he was waiting. Across from him, Randall Ringer Turner leaned against the cold concrete wall, arms crossed. Ringer had been a street hustler before landing in here, but unlike most, he had a mind for strategy. A man who knew how to survive. And right now, he was studying Kurt, eyes narrowed. "Damn, Tex," Ringer said, shaking his head. "You look like hell." Kurt wiped the dried blood from his chin and grinned, ignoring the pain that shot through his face. "Yeah, well, 6 guys against 1 isn't exactly fair." "Fair?" Ringer let out a bitter chuckle. "This place ain't built on fair." Kurt knew that all too well. The guards had set him up, thrown him into a room with 6 inmates who were looking to prove a point. Maybe they'd been bribed. Maybe they just didn't like the way he'd mouthed off to the judge. Either way, Kurt had taken his licks. But he wasn't just going to take it and move on. No, this was the moment he'd been waiting for. He leaned forward, voice low. "I need names, Ringer. The real ones, not just street names." Ringer rubbed his chin, hesitating. "You sure you want to go down that road?" Kurt's eyes darkened. "I don't have a choice." For a long moment, Ringer studied him, weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "All right, I'll get you the names." Kurt nodded. That was step 1, because once he had those names, the next part of his plan could begin. Meanwhile, miles away, in a luxurious home that had once been theirs, Lily poured herself a glass of wine and stretched out on the white leather couch. She felt untouchable. Kurt was locked up. Regina was legally in her custody. The courts had sided with her at every turn. She had won. The only thing that annoyed her was the armored truck incident. It had embarrassed her, made her the talk of the neighborhood for weeks. People had laughed behind her back, whispering about how her husband had paid her in bags of pennies. That still burned, but it didn't matter. She had gone to court, and Kurt had been punished for his defiance. He'll rot in there, she thought, sipping her wine. Just then, her phone vibrated. She picked it up and frowned. It was an email from her law firm, marked urgent. As she read the first few lines, the glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her boss had received an anonymous package, photos, emails, proof of her affairs with multiple partners at the firm. A scandal like this could ruin her. No, this isn't happening. A second email arrived, this one from her mortgage lender. The payment was overdue. That's impossible. Kurt is supposed to. Her breath hitched. She had been so focused on punishing him that she hadn't considered what would happen if he stopped playing by the rules. Then, a third notification, this one from an unknown sender. "Check your mailbox." Her hands trembled as she walked to the front door. The evening air was crisp, but she barely noticed as she retrieved the single, unmarked package sitting inside. She carried it back to the kitchen, heart pounding, and tore it open. Inside was a simple white envelope. She unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words. "Dear Lily, you took my money, my daughter, and my freedom. But you forgot one thing I never lose." She gripped the edge of the counter, her nails digging into the marble. "Look around, sweetheart. See that mortgage? I stopped paying it. You wanted luxury? Enjoy the foreclosure notice arriving next week." Lily's chest tightened. "Remember that fancy health insurance? Canceled. Hope you saved up for those doctor visits. And as for your law firm, well, let's just say your boss might not appreciate the evidence I send him about your office activities." Her blood ran cold. "But don't worry, you won't be completely alone. Your old friend, the IRS, will be in touch soon. Turns out, hiding assets in divorce proceedings is a federal offense. Have fun explaining that. See you around, love." Kurt, the letter fell from her hands. And then she screamed. Back in jail, Kurt lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, ignoring the soreness in his ribs. He didn't need to be outside to bring Lily's world crashing down. He had planned for this. And this was only the beginning.